Yes, yes, yes. Hatman Strikes Back, the Night Flight Show. Now, before we get started, I first want to acknowledge Commander B. For those of you who don't know who Commander B is, he's a DJ, and he used to have a show on Choice FM back in the days called The Night Flight. And so that's where I've taken the name of this show from, The Night Flight. And moving forward, if it's PM, I mean, here it's not quite PM, yeah, just PM now. But if it's PM in the UK and I'm doing a show, not PM, what am I talking about? Evening, because anything past noon is PM, right? If it's evening in the UK, then I'll call these night flight shows. Paying homage to the great Commander B. All right, Commander B used to play a lot of grime and garage and stuff like that. And famously, he was the guy who hosted a battle between Dizzy Rascal and, well, he was really Roll Deep. Dizzy Rascal, but mainly Dizzy Rascal. And So Solid. So yeah, Commander B, Night Flight, that's where I got the inspiration for the name of this show. So, shout out to everybody in the chat. Just pop the chat out on my screen so I can see the comments more easily. We got Mr. Luca as always. Big up Mr. Luca. We got Chainsaw. We got Brad. First round boxing. KS. Alexander. We got Shurge. He's hitting the gym for a late night Ramadan session. Big up. Shout out to Alexander. Yes, if everybody can hit the like button, it really helps. Shout out to Liam Payne. He says, hi, Hatman, have you ever played Mafia 3? No, I haven't. I think I actually do have the Mafia games, but I've never really played them or got into them. There was a friend of mine who really liked the Mafia games, but I don't know. They just never really captured me. Again, when it comes to like crime stuff, generally, crime games, I mean, there are some crime movies I like, but I don't go out of my way to watch gangster movies and gangster television shows and stuff like that. Same with games. I'm more into like adventure, sci-fi, you know, those type of things. Stuff that gets me thinking. Shout out to Hyro. Protagonist. Big up G-Man in the chat. Salute, salute. 11 p.m. UK time. That's right. I try and coordinate these lives to not be too crazy late. You know, UK time. Shout out to Liam in Chains over there in Australia. Big up. We got Sean Barker. We got Lakvinda. Yes, yes. Rick. Bexy. Kyle. He says Xbox or PlayStation. I've always preferred PlayStation, mainly because of the exclusives. Xbox, particularly in the 360 generation, was the king when it came to online multiplayer, because a lot of the big developers like, you know, Activision with Call of Duty and whatnot, they used the Xbox as the lead console. And so the PS3 ports tended to be inferior. But I've never really been very good at online multiplayer games, especially COD. I enjoyed COD back in the days, but I was never any good at it. And so I was mainly into PlayStation exclusives. And for me, the Sony exclusives, for several generations at least, were better than Xbox exclusives. So I did own the 360, but yeah, I was more of a PlayStation guy because, as I say, those exclusives. Look, Vinda says, have you ever watched The Platform? I haven't. I know of it, though. It's like that concept. Is it a series or a movie? I think it might be a movie, but where it's like a prison and they're all on like different platforms and there's like a table or something or a platform that goes through the middle of the prison and it has food on it and all that type of business. So I'm aware of it. G-Man says, I was always good at Modern Warfare 2 online multiplayer back in the days. Yeah, I wasn't. I tried my best, but I was never very good at Call of Duty. I was a pretty good player at Killzone 3 online. I was pretty good at that, but Call of Duty, I had a few good games once in a blue moon, but my KD for most COD games, I was barely breaking even. You know what I mean? I had a KD of 1 or a little bit above that. Lehman Chain says, I've been watching the Eubank Ben press conference, and the low level of intelligence being displayed by Ben is frightening. He thinks Eubank is the one with low intelligence. Loki says, did you watch the Piers Morgan Ben Eubank interview, and what did you make of it? No, I didn't watch it. Had no interest in it, to be honest. Shout out to the Celtic Magician. He says, I ate a tub of Ben and Jerry's and I'm ashamed. What flavor Ben and Jerry's was it? It might make some nice ice cream. Pro Cala says, have you watched Big Mama's House before? Yeah, I've seen Big Mama's House with Martin Lawrence. My dad actually found that really funny. Yeah, my dad found Big Mama's House really funny. Rick says, thoughts on potential discovery under the pyramids? Yeah, I kind of touched on this a little bit in yesterday's stream. And it really should bring it home to people that the mainstream Egyptological narrative on how the pyramids were built is a load of absolute nonsense. Okay, it is nonsense. And I also want to emphasize the fact that the ancient Egyptian civilization lasted for at least 3,500 years. So the Great Pyramid, the 3 pyramids at Giza, were built during the Old Kingdom, it is believed. And so, to put it in perspective, the Old Kingdom was literally like 3,000 something years before Cleopatra, who was the last pharaoh of ancient Egypt. She lived closer to the invention of the iPhone than she did the building of the Great Pyramid. So many of the later dynasties of ancient Egypt were probably just as clueless about how the pyramids were built as we are, because all of the best stuff in ancient Egypt and all of the biggest stuff was built during the Old Kingdom. Subsequent dynasties seemingly lost the technology, and as I say, it would have been just as much of a mystery to them. And, they probably tried to replicate and back engineer how some of the great monuments and great pyramids were built, but they weren't able to figure it out, and therefore they built inferior versions and smaller versions and so on. But yeah, what was discovered under the Giza pyramid, I think it's the second pyramid, not the biggest one, the second biggest one, was these enormous cylindrical structures below that pyramid with apparently like staircases around them, like spiral staircase. I mean, absolutely incredible. And there's no way that the Egyptological mainstream narrative about how those things were built is correct. I've always thought it was nonsense. I couldn't tell you how they were built, okay, but if you listen to construction engineers, they'll tell you that the stuff that the Egyptologists say about how they were built is just a load of rubbish. So it's mysterious. And we had a discussion the other evening about science and how there's a lot of dogma, unfortunately, in science, because it's an aspect of the human condition. Humans, the majority of humans, are predisposed to dogmatic thinking. And the reason for this is apparently because human beings are terrified of uncertainty. This is why they like dogma, because dogma gives them certainty. Whereas I've always been the opposite. I've always been a person who is actually really excited and intrigued by uncertainty and mysteries and the fact that we don't know so many things. But such minds, such intrepid minds are in the minority, right? Most people want certainty. They want answers for everything that are concrete and can't be questioned. So, Yeah. Alexander says, Hatman, would you consider bringing on guests? Yeah, for sure. I used to try to get a lot of guests on for my streams, but because they're so impromptu, I don't end up giving people a lot of notice. And so I usually get turned down, so I stopped asking. But I did used to ask in my Element group quite a lot. I used to ask, I asked G-Man a few times, and Boxing on the Edge, and Outmatch Boxing as well. So I used to ask them, but again, because I do these things impromptu, I can't expect them to be at my beck and call, you know? But I would like to have more guests on, particularly for these laid back, chop it up type shows. Shout out to Mr. Luca for the super chat. He says, Warren and Barry Hearn remind me of Pete and Baz. In fact, I'm glad you say that, because the tall one from Pete and Baz, I'm not sure which one is which. Which one is the short one and which one is the tall one? But the tall one with a deep voice reminds me of Mick Carney, who was the head coach at Fitzroy Lodge for many years. He died, several years ago. Mick Carney passed away. But his whole vibe and even his voice, he had a deep voice, Mick Carney, reminded me, and his mannerisms and everything reminded me of the tall one from Pete and Baz. And a lot of the banter he used to have with the other old guys. G-Man says, I took the Chris Smooth approach and camped. Okay, I guess you're talking about Modern Warfare 2, Call of Duty. Seamus says, what's up, Hatman? You still thinking about making your own website? Yes, but I'm not as urgent about it right now as I was a couple years back. But yes, I do plan on making my own website. Jimbo says, Ben is a major idiot if he can't tell that Eubank has just winded him up. I hope he's just acting like this to promote the fight, because if he's actually getting this mad, it's embarrassing. Celtic Magician talking about his Ben & Jerry's ice cream. He says it's called Cookie Vermonster. Okay, I see the play on words. Cookie Vermonster, as in monster. All right. Cookies and Sunday kind of thing. All right, sounds nice. Shout out to Charles B in the chat. Shout out to Goozy. Goozy says Egypt is losing a lot of tourism. This kind of news helps them a lot. I call BS on it though. So you're saying that the Egyptian government and whatever scientists and whatnot conspired to create a fake discovery. I mean, it's possible that they conspired to create a fake discovery, come up with some fakeness to boost tourism. But I tend to suspect that it's real. Anyone who's really looked into the, not just the Giza pyramids, but many ancient structures, once you apply any level of critical thinking to it, you'll realize that the mainstream version of how these things were constructed is just absolute rubbish, right? So, for example, the stones at Baalbek, right now, I don't really have a particularly high opinion of most mainstream sources, but the History Channel on their website, to their credit, say that they do not know how the enormous stones at Baalbek were hewn, were cut and transported. They don't know. So shout out to the History Channel for admitting that. because many other mainstream sites will come up with some absolute rubbish, all right, for how these things were cut and transported. If you haven't seen the stones at Baalbek, all right, have a look at it, all right. So we've got an idiot here saying, not this ancient architect's crap. Okay, you sound like a brain dead normie. Let's get you out of here. You don't need to be involved in this discussion. It's obviously above your level of consciousness. So, yeah, we're talking about ancient monuments, the construction of which has never been explained in a satisfactory fashion. So yeah, the stones at Baalbek, some of them weigh close to 1,000 tons. 1,000 tons. And in that area of the Lebanon, the quarry where the stones were cut from is like a couple of miles away from the temple where they were laid as the foundation of. And it's hilly terrain. In the ancient world, how on earth could you possibly cut 1,000-ton blocks of stone and transport them over hilly terrain? Like, people don't understand the enormity of the cranes you would need to even lift 1,000-ton block of stone. It's absolutely insane. Yes, it would be a very difficult undertaking even today. An incredibly difficult undertaking with enormous cranes and all that sort of stuff. So how they were doing that in the ancient world is absolutely baffling. Seriously, it's absolutely baffling. And again, I do want to credit the History Channel for admitting that they're baffled, that they don't know how this could possibly have been done with the technology we're told that the ancients had at the time. So yeah, look up Baalbek. It's in the Lebanon. Just look at the size of the stones. Unbelievably massive. Incredible. Bigger than anything in Egypt in terms of the, single blocks of stone. Absolutely incredible. The Celtic magician says, Hatman, have you seen some of the old paintings that have what looks like UFOs in the sky and background? Yeah, I've seen some of them, but I don't know. I don't know whether I would interpret them as like flying saucers and stuff like that. They've got interesting things in the background and people are interpreting them as UFOs, looking through a modern lens at them. But they're interesting. I'd like to hear an alternative explanation, from, let's say, art experts, art historians and whatnot. Cole says, Hatman, do you believe in giant humans who lived in the past? It depends on what you mean by giant. I've never seen any evidence for, like, colossal humans, 20 foot plus or whatever, but obviously there've always been 7 foot humans, and there've been groups of humans, tribes even, who are very tall. There still is today. In Africa, there are certain tribes who are extremely tall, like the average height might be 6'5" among them. And in the ancient world, there were subspecies of, well, not just subspecies of humans, but even, as I say, groups of Homo sapiens who were very, very tall. In the Americas, some of the European explorers reported seeing enormous human beings in the Americas. So, yeah, in terms of 7 foot giants, for sure, there's always been those around. But the colossal, like 20, 30 foot giants, I can't tell you that they have never existed on Earth, but I've never seen any evidence for them. Because there's been a lot of like hoax photos that show, intact skeletons of enormous proportions on the internet, you know, found in the Middle East, but those photos just look like total rubbish to me. Yes, if everybody can hit the like button, it'd be much appreciated. Thanks in advance. Okay, this guy says, what's your theory on how the pyramids were constructed when they didn't have the technology we have today? Mainstream media says it was achievable due to slavery. Yeah, the slavery thing is neither here nor there, because it doesn't matter whether the people were slaves or whether they were paid. The fact is, you cannot move a 1,000-ton block. I mean, this is not the pyramids, this is Baalbek again. You cannot move a 1,000-ton block with ropes and log rollers across hilly landscape. If you can do it, show me, replicate it today. See, science is supposed to be about experiment. I mean, this isn't even science, it's just Egyptologists and other historians speculating about how these things were done. But if we want to get scientific about it, cut a 1,000-ton block of stone, okay, without modern machinery, for one, and then show me how you're going to transport it with log rollers and a bunch of men with ropes across hilly landscape 2 kilometers and then lift it into place in the foundation of a building with precision. Show me how that can be done. Show me how it can be done and then I'll believe it. I'm telling you, no one's ever going to do it because it can't be done the way that they're claiming it was done. And again, with regards to the oldest pyramids at Giza, how all that stuff was constructed, I have no idea. I'm baffled by it. You know what I mean? I've got no idea. I'm not afraid to say I have no idea. Robert Bouval, who for many, many decades was a highly experienced construction engineer who wrote books about Egypt and the pyramids and whatnot, and who's a longtime colleague of Graham Hancock. As a construction engineer, he said that the pyramids at Giza are a total and utter mystery. And that's a guy who worked for decades building large structures, skyscrapers, all types of different architecture. He did it for a living, so he knows what he's talking about. He knows the logistics of building large buildings. And he's been saying for years, it is absolutely inexplicable how they were able to do that with the technology they were said to have had at the time. Inexplicable. So, yeah, I couldn't tell you how they did it. It's totally baffling. JR says, what about the Mayan pyramids, Hatman? Not as precise as the Egyptian ones, but still mysterious. Still mysterious, but they're built with much smaller blocks of stone. And because the blocks of stone are much, much smaller, then conventional, quote unquote, construction methods are more plausible because the stone blocks are so much smaller. Mr. Lucas has Hatman thoughts on the dinosaurs. Well, I guess you're alluding to some people who think that dinosaurs didn't exist and it's all some big hoax. I don't know. I'm open to both possibilities, even if it's real. I mean, if it was a big hoax, it's been going on a long time, isn't it? So I would tend to side with dinosaurs were real, but I know this world and this reality is so bizarre and crazy, and they do hide so much stuff that I can't rule out the hoax hypothesis. Falatigate says Jean-Pierre Houdin already showed how the pyramids were built. Jog my memory, is that the guy who tried to build a tiny pyramid and failed? He couldn't even move 1-ton blocks? Nobody has shown how the pyramids were built. Not the Great Pyramid. No one's been able to satisfactorily show how that was built, ever. There was one theory that there was a ramp, an internal ramp inside the Great Pyramid, and they used like ropes and stuff like that. Yeah, the internal structure theory. Yeah, I saw that one. Yeah, I know about that one with the internal ramp. And they showed like in the Grand Gallery, at the top of the Grand Gallery, these grooves where they believe that the ropes were and all that type of stuff. But yeah, none of that is convincing to me at all. Because again, people don't really understand the size of the stones that we're talking about. And moving blocks of that size, not just up through a pyramid, but even onto boats. I mean, they say, oh yeah, they quarried these rocks and they put them on boats. Have you seen the boats that the ancient Egyptians had? How are they lifting, 80-ton blocks onto these boats? Without modern technology and all that type of stuff. And then lifting them in, no, I don't buy any of it. And then on top of all that, of course, you've got the structures that they have found underneath the second pyramid at Giza, which are actually absolutely bigger than the pyramid itself. It's inexplicable and bizarre. It's totally bizarre. Totally bizarre. If any of you haven't seen these LiDAR or ground penetrating radar images that they've just released from underneath the second pyramid at Giza, I advise you to all go and have a look at them, because they are literally larger than the pyramid itself. These cylindrical structures underneath the pyramid is absolutely crazy. So how on earth all that was done, I've got no idea. And it isn't just the pyramids, but in the ancient world, megalithic construction was commonplace. I mean, if you go to Peru, places in Central and South America, they have these megalithic constructions, which are just inexplicable, because why would the ancients use such enormous blocks of stone to build things? Why wouldn't they use smaller blocks of stone? For example, like the Romans. Yeah, the Romans used manageably small blocks of stone to construct their temples and buildings and stuff like that. Romans used blocks of stone which were more comparable to what is used today in construction. It's logical that you would cut stone up into manageable sized blocks. But yet in the ancient world, all over the world, not just in Egypt, in the Lebanon and the Americas, everywhere, they were using absolutely colossal blocks, massive. Why would you do that? Do you know what I mean? It seems like counterintuitive. It seems illogical to be using such massive blocks. Why not just, chop them up the way the Romans did? BG London says, we need a Back to the Future DeLorean car for that answer. Indeed we do. Indeed we do. Jackie Boy Johnson says, is that to you the biggest mystery on Earth? It's one of them in terms of megalithic architecture. Why build megalithic architecture? Why do it? Why use enormous blocks? KS says, only explanation is that they were giants. That's one explanation. If there were giant humans, they could move these things more easily. But I don't know. Falatigate, God, I struggle to pronounce his name. Yeah, Falatigate says, when you have massive animals back in them days, you need a solid foundation. Are you saying that's why they used megalithic blocks? I'm not sure what you're answering there. Jackie Boy Johnson says ball lightning is pretty mysterious. Yeah, ball lightning, I don't think has ever been captured on camera. They've done like experiments in laboratories with electricity where tiny little, if you want to call them balls of electricity, are shown to exist for maybe half a second. But in terms of like ball lightning floating through the air, I've never seen any footage of it, but there's been many reports from, regular citizens and whatnot who have reported these things. People on aircraft have said ball lightning has come on the plane and gone down the middle of the aisle. So you can call it ball lightning or these orbs, the Foo Fighters in World War II, which were really mysterious. But yeah, the ancient world is a big mystery as far as the megalithic architecture worldwide, from the Americas to Africa to the Middle East, Europe, and so on. It's bizarre. And even the Far East out in Asia, there are some megalithic constructions there as well. But we didn't really get into music that much yesterday. So I want to talk a bit more about music in today's stream. William says, Hatman, do you believe in the Nephilim people? Shout out from Leeds. It's a story in the Bible, right? When the angels mated with the daughters of men, they created a hybrid people called the Nephilim. Again, it's a story in the Bible. So I haven't seen any evidence for it. Is it possible that bizarre things like that happened in the past? I guess so. I mean, I'm open to it, right? I don't claim to have the answers for what this reality is, why humans exist, so on and so forth. I mean, I was talking to a couple people a couple of streams back with regards to God and the existence of God or the non-existence, because you can't prove it either way. But there is evidence, according to creationists, of intelligent design, right? Some of them will say that for life on Earth and even the structure of the universe to all be random, it will be like a tornado going through a junkyard and coming out the other side with like a fully working jumbo jet. They say that the idea it's all random is totally ridiculous, okay? And when you look into nature, everything shows intelligent design. And there are scientists out there, creationist scientists, who again will make these arguments. You'll see them on YouTube who make these arguments saying that the deeper you look into nature and the deeper you look into science and quantum physics, the more evidence you see for intelligent design. I'm not saying I agree with them, but I'm open to their views, I'm agnostic on these things. I don't know how this reality and this world and this universe has come about. I'm okay with not knowing. Do you know what I mean? I'm not somebody that is just so desperate for answers that I become dogmatic. Shout out to Bullex. Falatigate says, don't worry. Neohim come back when the devil gets cast out of heaven, plus the ones buried under the earth. Yeah, I'm aware of all the Bible stuff, but I mean, what do you make? What am I supposed to make of it? It's a story in an old book. I don't know. BG London says LiDAR scanning technology is very interesting. Yes, it is. If you watched season 2 of Graham Hancock's Ancient Apocalypse, they were using LiDAR extensively in the Amazon jungle, in the Amazon rainforest, and they found loads and loads and loads of structures under the Amazon, the current Amazon rainforest, which shows that the rainforest actually expanded, and grew in the ancient world. And there was some suggestion by some of the people on the program that the large parts of the Amazon rainforest might have actually been planted by humans originally. Not the whole thing, but a lot of it might have been actually seeded and planted by humans because of the fact that there are so many structures under the Amazon rainforest. Obviously, back then, it would have been cleared, right? It would have been clear area for them to build stuff. First Round Boxing says, what are some rap hip-hop albums you recommend for a hip-hop casual? Well, it depends what kind of hip-hop you want to listen to, because there are so many different types of hip-hop, right? There's like conscious hip-hop, there's conspiracy hip-hop, there's gangster rap, and different types of gangster rap. There's like old boom bap, 90s gangster rap. There's trap, there's drill. There's like conscious, Afrocentric. There's just so many different types. So if you could narrow it down a bit and tell me the type of rap you might be interested in listening to, then I might be able to give you some recommendations. Sean McNally says, the earth is measured flat. Anyone can prove this using geometry. The sky is a perfect clock. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess you're trying to say that the earth is flat. I looked into the flat earth thing with an open mind, but it doesn't add up. I've looked at all the flat earth models and all that type of stuff, and it just doesn't add up. Light does not behave the way that the flat earth people, flat earth proponents, show it to work. With the sun and the moon being small and close to the whole thing just doesn't work. The globe earth works far better to explain the seasons, night and day, so on and so forth. But, I'm not here to ridicule anyone who believes the earth is flat or whatever. I'm glad people are asking questions and not trusting the mainstream, but not everything that the mainstream say is a lie. I mean, there are some things they say that is true. And as I say, I looked into that whole flat earth thing and I was like, this doesn't work. The flat earth model doesn't work. The way the light works and the sun, and it, to me, none of it works. Jackie Boy Johnson says, you can see the curvature of the earth at a certain height. If you go into space, then presumably, yeah, you'd be able to see it. But from a plane, you shouldn't be able to see it. There are some misleading videos out there, which actually gives fuel to people that believe the earth is flat. There's been like the highest parachute jump in history, right? Or one of them, which was nearly in low Earth orbit. And they used a fisheye lens, okay? And the fisheye lens distorts the shape of the earth and makes it look like really curved. And obviously, flat earth proponents look at that and say, see, they're tricking people with fisheye lenses. Yeah, they are using fisheye lenses. The earth is not that curved, right? It wouldn't look that that extreme curved from that altitude. But as I say, the flat earth thing, it doesn't add up to me at all. I've looked at the models and Sean says, look deeper, brother. It works perfectly. Seasons make way more sense on an enclosed system, but all good peace. Yeah, I've looked at it. I've looked at all the different models and all the videos from Eric Dubé and all these different guys. Again, I'm not one of these normie mainstream guys who just completely dismiss everything before I've looked into it. I looked into it with an open mind and it just doesn't work. The model, the mechanics of it just don't work. The way light, I saw one of these flat earth models and they had the sun and the moon moving around on a circular flat earth. How is the sun, right, if it's close to the earth and it's small, how is it supposed to light up exactly half of the earth at any one time? And the way that they had light behaving in the model was just ridiculous. Light doesn't behave like that. Okay, light from a sphere is going to make a circular light pattern on a flat surface. Yeah, it's going to make a circular light pattern. And the edges, because it's a sphere, the edges of the circle are going to be diffuse, right? So there's no way that it can light up half of a flat circle at any one time. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't work. The spherical Earth works far better, to explain everything. Night and day, seasons, so on and so forth. Sean says it does. It just takes the sun light with it. It's all perspective. Again, to me, it doesn't work. I've looked at all of those videos where they're talking about perspective and this, that, and the other. And personally, if you ask my opinion, I'm just one man. I don't know it all. But if you ask my opinion, I think the flat earth thing is a psyop. Personally, I think it's a psyop. I think the flat earth thing has been put out there to mislead people. And people who question mainstream narratives will then get tarred with that brush. Oh, you believe the earth is flat and all that kind of thing. I think it's a psyop, personally. Okay, William says, in theory, could we be living in a simulation? Well, yeah, there is simulation theory, right? That's like a scientific theory now. And I think it's very interesting. I think it's very, very interesting. And, one of the things that I've spoken about on Patreon is the possibility that subconsciously human beings actually know that this is a simulation. And that's why we've created video games. It's like the subconscious mind of human beings creating a microcosmic version of our simulated reality. Do you know what I mean? Because when we play a video game, we have an avatar on screen, and which would the player symbolically would be whatever, the spirit. Do you know what I mean? And you're controlling this avatar inside this sprite inside the video game, and it's got a whole world and physics and all sorts of stuff inside the video game. And so maybe that's like a fractal. Maybe again, subconsciously, human beings are recreating our own simulated reality. Yes, a simulation in a simulation, indeed. It's like without consciously necessarily realizing we live in a simulation, we're manifesting a subconscious knowing by creating video games. Like a fractal. I'm not sure how many of you guys have seen Men in Black. I forget which Men in Black movie it was. But just to give you a visual representation of what I'm talking about, there's a part in Men in Black where there's a cat. And this cat has got like a collar. And on its collar is like a marble. But when they zoom into the marble's actually a universe. And the camera zooms into that universe inside the marble. And they keep zooming and zooming and zooming and zooming. And it eventually reaches another cat. And that cat has also got a marble around its neck. And they keep zooming and zooming and zooming again. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So maybe it's something like that, our reality. Like this infinite fractal thing. Joe says, do you hope there's an afterlife, Hatman? Well, it depends what kind of afterlife it is. You know? Depends what kind of I mean, if it's an afterlife where there's no physical suffering or anything like that, or mental or emotional suffering, and it's just you floating around as a spirit, exploring and whatnot and having a good time, then yeah, it's great. But if it's like the judgment thing of the Bible and several other religions, even in the ancient Egyptian religions and ancient Nubian religions, there's judgment in the afterlife, right? That one is a bit more concerning because you don't know whether you qualify. But one thing I can tell you is I definitely hope that there's no reincarnation. Yeah. I hope to heaven that there's no reincarnation. I do not want to come back to this place, bro. This world is so messed up. I don't want to come back here. And I've had enough challenges in my life. There are so many other people who have it way, way, way more difficult than I've ever had it. People who suffer unspeakable horrors. So if you're going to be reincarnated, what? It's going to be like a lottery and you could end up as some type of victim of abuse or, do you know what I mean? No, thank you. I've got no desire to be reincarnated back on this planet. No, thank you. So I hope that there's no reincarnation. I'll tell you that. Joe says it's rough out there. It definitely is rough out there. Some of the lives that people live on this earth, bro, are so awful. You know what I mean? Why would I want to take a chance, you know, in the life lottery? Shout out to Charles B for the super chat. Big up Charles B every time. Foundation. Big up the Patreon crew. Charles B says that Lotion Man tune has been added to the playlist. Yes, Capleton. No lotion man. Girl, we lotion me no lotion man. You know, reincarnation would only be good if you can pick who you reincarnate as. But then, surely you can't pick who you reincarnate as because nobody would choose to reincarnate as somebody who was, let's say, born physically disabled or, you know, born in a war zone. Nobody would choose those things, right? Unless they're insane. So presumably, if reincarnation exists, it's random. It's like a lottery. And I don't want to participate in that type of lottery, mate. So when this life is over, I'm good. Don't send me back here. Cash says some believe it's karma-based. Indeed, in the Vedic traditions, the concept of karma, which is a very interesting concept, isn't it? Karma and dharma and all that type of stuff. Very, very interesting. Dominic says, reincarnation, but your memory has been wiped from a previous life. See, that's one of the issues with the concept of reincarnation. If your memory gets wiped from a previous life, then how could you possibly learn the lessons from a previous life? It's almost like a sick joke. Like they send you back to live again, but you've forgotten all of the things that happened in the previous life. It's just like, why? It only makes sense if you remember the previous life, then you can correct your behavior in the next life, right? Because you have memory of the previous one. Fatality says, do you reckon our spirits live outside of our bodies when we die? There's evidence for it. You can't prove it one way or the other, but there are countless instances or countless accounts, right, of out of body experiences. I mean, just thousands or millions of people have reported out of body experiences. There was an American news item. In fact, it might have been a show like 60 Minutes or something like that, where they actually interviewed a bunch of people that had out of body experiences. And one of them, and these were like, you know, these were not the type of people that you would think would make stuff up and just talk rubbish. But one of them was this old guy who actually got struck by lightning when he was on the phone, right? In his house. And his house was struck by lightning. And then the lightning ended up coming through the phone. And so 1 second he's on the phone. The next thing he hears a flash or a bang. And then he's at the top of the stairs, right? This is what he said. This is what he recalls. He was at the top of the stairs. And he looked down and he saw a body lying on the floor and his wife and other people in the house screaming. And they were running down to look at his body. Yeah. And then after a few moments, he realized that body was him. Totally bizarre. And there are loads and loads, literally probably millions at this stage of people who report out of body experiences. Even Graham Hancock got electrocuted. I think it was a 17-year-old, and he said he had an out of body experience. Young Spray, Young Spray is like an ignorant roadman. And he got stabbed a few years ago, nearly lost his life. And he said when he was sitting on the floor after being poked full of holes, he said he was up above looking down on his body. So that is suggestive of consciousness being able to exist outside of the body. Yeah. And you know, interestingly, I was speaking about video games and how it could be like a fractal, a microcosm of the macrocosm, right? In many video games, in first-person shooters, when you get killed, the camera quickly cuts to a bird's eye view of you looking down at your sprite's body. Yeah. So there's definitely a lot of evidence that it's not proof, but it is evidence that consciousness, at least for a time, can exist outside of the body. In relatively close proximity, it has to be said. Because the out-of-body experiencers are still within relatively close proximity of their body when they have the experience, right? So they might be floating up near the ceiling in a room, etc. Charles B said, did Young Spray die or was he still alive? No, he was still alive, but I guess close to death, right? Because he had this experience in the place where he got stabbed. It wasn't in the hospital or anything. It was actually in the room where he was stabbed. And there was a video of it. I was sent a video at the time when it happened by a friend of mine on WhatsApp. And yeah, so I saw the video, not of him actually being stabbed, but the video of the aftermath when he was on the floor bleeding and stuff like that. Reality's Awakened now, says Hatman. What if it's like a level up system where once you reach a high enough state of awareness, you unlock memories of your past lives? Could consciousness work in that way? Hey, your guess is as good as mine, you know? Your guess is as good as mine. But it's an interesting idea. Again, like leveling up in a video game. You know, you get access to your past lives when you level up in terms of consciousness. But again, you could then be trapped if you're not leveling up into, like, what leads people to level up their consciousness is the point I'm making. What impetus do people have to level up their consciousness? If you could remember your past lives, then surely that would give you the impetus to level up. But yeah, I hope that there's no reincarnation. I don't like the... I can't say that there isn't any, but I wouldn't want to reincarnate. Deb Yarker says anecdotal testimony isn't evidence. Yes, it is evidence. You don't know the definition of evidence then, because that absolutely is evidence. It's circumstantial evidence, but loads of people get convicted on circumstantial evidence. If you have enough of it, you can get convicted on circumstantial evidence. I mean, DNA, you do realize, is circumstantial evidence, right? So it absolutely 100% is evidence. I guess you don't know the definition of evidence. It's evidence. It's not proof. Proof is something different. It's evidence. Just like witnesses of crimes are evidence. They're not proof. It's evidence. Now you can debate the validity of the evidence or how strong the evidence is, but it's evidence nonetheless. And as I say, the sheer number of people that have had out-of-body experiences is almost evidence within itself. Because these people come from all walks of life, all different economic backgrounds, different races, social backgrounds, all different religions. I mean, just everything. The amount of people that have had out-of-body experiences is crazy. What, they're all making it up? All of them? They're all crazy. They all want attention. Like millions of people that have had these experiences. I don't buy it. There's something weird going on there. And consciousness is certainly more mysterious than most people realize, because science has no explanation for why consciousness even exists. Zero explanation for why it exists. Zero explanation for why we're not just, basically biological robots that are not conscious. Because it is believed that more primitive organisms are not conscious. I guess there's no way of knowing for sure, but it's believed that they are not conscious. So why would human beings be conscious? There doesn't seem to be any explanation in science for it. So consciousness is the biggest mystery, really, in existence, or one of the biggest mysteries. Why does consciousness even exist? What's its function? Charles B says, I find people with no internal monologues bizarre. So do I. Bizarre and quite scary. Because a person with no internal monologue is almost like what I just described, a biological robot. Somebody who maybe isn't sentient. Who's just responding to, stimuli, and they don't actually have the ability to think and perceive the way that people that do have the internal monologue, you know what I mean, are able to. But yeah, it's bizarre because there have been studies done that show a scarily high percentage of people do not have an internal monologue. Weird. That's weird. But people who don't have it probably think that us who do have it are weird, So Jazz says those are NPCs. Yeah, I suspect so. People who actually are basically biological robots. BG London says you're talking about Daniel Dubois. Everybody picking on poor Daniel. Fatality says the whole consciousness thing is fascinating. Dreams too. There's no answers. Indeed. Yeah, that's a very good point. Dreams are also a fascinating thing. Again, a scientific mind is going to look at dreams and think, what's the function of dreams? What is the function of dreams? Why do they exist? Shout out to Striker. Matt says, then again, look at how a lot of people act. It's not surprising indeed. Okay, Malik says, I woke up out of my sleep on my living room couch and I found myself literally in the air floating at least 4 foot high with gold Egyptian-like writing on the wall with words glowing bright. Okay, is that what actually happened to you? Or are you trolling? Was this a dream or did it seem real? Charles B says, one of the most sinister things about weed is it steals your dreams. Julio says, hang on. Yeah, you know, I don't buy the explanation that it's like chemicals released by the brain and all that kind of stuff. And I'll tell you for why. Because chemicals being released by the brain and all that type of stuff cannot account for why it's a bird's eye view. How the people who have these out of body experiences literally report looking down on their bodies. If it's chemicals released by the brain, then the brain can release chemicals that shut off, you know, your consciousness altogether, shut off your sight, shut off your pain. You know, there are certain chemicals that are released by the brain that are pain-killing chemicals and stuff like that when you're close to death. But this is a particular situation where these people are floating up above and they're looking down on their bodies and they can actually report details. So the one that I saw, which was on a news program in America, or one of the ones I saw, this guy he was floating at the top of the stairs, looking down on his body, and he accurately described what his family members did when he was lying down by the phone, you know, because this lightning had come through the phone and knocked him back and whatever. And he accurately described what everybody did. I don't know, but I tend to suspect that consciousness can exist outside of the body, at least for a period of time. I don't know whether it can permanently exist outside of the body, but for a period of time. And again, when you go into the world of the quanta, right? An atom has no solidity. So you've got the nucleus of an atom, then you've got, you know, proton, neutron, electron. People don't realize that the vast majority of an atom is actually empty space. So what we perceive to be solid is actually not solid because it's made out of atoms which have no solidity to them. So when you realize that, when you go into the world of the quantum, that's when something like consciousness existing outside of the body actually starts to become more plausible. Do you know what I mean? Because reality is very, very weird at the quantum level. On the, macro level, the way we perceive things, as we see, as our senses allow us to perceive things, things don't seem that mysterious. Okay, but when you go down to the quantum level, it's very mysterious and it's very weird. And when you've studied all that, you start to think, okay, maybe it's actually plausible then that whatever consciousness is can exist outside of the body, at least for a period of time. Maybe not permanently, but for a period of time. Striker says, I had the high school teacher who told me a story when he drowned as a kid and described that floating above himself and watching himself. He was obviously saved, but the story stayed with me. Shout out to Pacer. He says, I like the night flight setting. Yeah, the good old night flights. Just a random question. What do you guys prefer, night flights or day flights? When you're going on holiday, what's better, a night flight or a day flight? People saying night flight. Is it because you can get some kip, get some sleep in? Or it's more quiet because everybody else is sleeping? Or is it because you get that day? I mean, actually, it depends on the time zone. But a lot of the time, if you're taking a night flight, you can arrive in the morning in the country that you're flying to, rather than arriving at night and you've missed the whole day of holiday. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, as I was saying earlier on, let's talk about music. Whatever genre you guys want to discuss. I can't tell you that I am as well versed in every genre, but my taste in music is pretty eclectic, so we can get into it. If you're talking about newer music, and when I say newer music, understand I'm an old man, so anything in the past 15, 20 years is newer to me. Whereas if you're a younger person, 15 or 20 years is old school. Dominic says everyone's more chilled on a night flight. Debiaka says whichever is cheaper. Charles B says, I can't get my head around people like Dawkins and other atheists. How do the mysteries of the world not make them think outside of their bubble? Maybe they don't have the internal monologue, CPB says Tupac or Biggie. Neither. I think Biggie was a better rapper, technically, definitely a better rapper, but I was never really a big fan of either of them, truth be told. Debiaka says cabin crew ladies are so attractive. I've known a couple cabin crew girls over the years. In fact, there was one girl who I knew, and like so many people, she left university with a useless degree. I can't remember what her degree was, but it was one of the useless degrees. It wasn't a STEM degree. It was some useless nonsense, right? And, saddled with debt and a useless degree and no career in that particular field. So she didn't know what she wanted to do with her life with this useless degree and all this debt. And so I suggested that she become an air hostess. And, I did some searching for how to train up and this, that, and the other for her and helped her out. And she went on to become an air hostess. But before I knew her, there was another girl who was already an air hostess that I knew. And I never realized what the world of cabin crew was actually like. I never really thought about it, right? But when I met her and was speaking to her, she told me, well, it was actually somebody else who told me this, but I asked her about it to confirm whether this is true. And basically, many of you guys won't be surprised by this, but this is back in the days in my early 20s. I wasn't really thinking about the goings on among cabin crew. But somebody told me that the pilots are always smashing the air hostesses. To some of you, that's just going to be the most obvious thing. You know, the pilots literally run through all the hottest air hostesses all the time. And so when I met this girl, I was like, is that true? Like, is it that scandalous? And she was like, yeah, it is that scandalous. The pilots are knocking down the air hostesses like you would not believe. Yo, they're knocking them down like you wouldn't believe. And a lot of these pilots are, of course, married men, but they're away all the time, you know, flying back and forth, and they're going to these exotic locations, and, you know, the cabin crew are getting drunk and going out together and whatnot, and the pilots are obviously making a lot more money than the air hostesses. They've got a big career, and yeah, they're knocking boots all over the place. So if you happen to have a girlfriend who's an air hostess, you might need to watch out. Huh? Glad Tidings says they're not that attractive, to be honest. They're all too thin. It depends on which airline you're flying. You know, depends on which airline you're flying. Some airlines have got hot air hostesses. Some airlines, as far as I can tell, is blatant that they pick staff they hire based on looks, partly. You know, in Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer, I spoke about a manager of a nightclub that I worked in who would instruct us bouncers not to let ugly girls in the place. Yeah, we were told not to let, in fact, no, it wasn't ugly girls. It was not to let average looking girls in. Yeah. The guy told us if the girls are average looking, don't let them in. You can let hot girls in, or you can let ugly girls in, but don't let average looking girls in. And his rationale for that, yeah, his reasoning for it is he said, I agree with Pacer. Qatar Airlines got some fit birds. Yeah, Qatar Airlines, that's my favorite airline, actually, Qatar. It's a great airline. Much better food than normal airlines as well on Qatar. But yeah, this manager used to tell us they have to either be hot or butt ugly. Don't let average looking girls in, because in a dark nightclub, men who are inebriated, right, been drinking alcohol, obviously you can recognize a hot girl in a club. And if the girls are ugly enough, the beer goggles still won't be enough to make them attractive. So basically it was catering to men inside the club so they know what they're getting into. Yeah. Whereas the average chicks, when you got the beer goggles on, they might look really hot, but then you take her home, you wake up the next day and you're like, thinking there's a hot girl next to you, you pull back the covers and you're like, oh, she's only average. And that is why that manager said no average chicks in the club. It can only be hot or ugly. Nothing in between. Yeah, King says there was this girl in Qatar Airways, the back covered the whole aisle. In my experience on Qatar, they got some very pretty, like Filipino Oriental girls working on there. I've seen very pretty, like Ethiopian, Eritrean girls working on Qatar as well. And as I say, I think that they are hiring, at least partly, based upon the looks of these girls. Yeah, they have to pass a certain looks criteria or standard. Yeah, look standard or they don't get hired. And actually, that same manager would hire bar staff, female bar staff in that club the same way. Yeah, I remember he used to tell us this stuff all the time. Like one girl came in looking for a job as a barmaid. And he'd always say if they were not attractive, he'd say, oh yeah, fill out this form. And if a position comes up, we'll get back to you. And unless they were really short-staffed, they would never get back to these girls. But as soon as a hot girl came in with like big boobs and all that type of stuff, they wouldn't even have to fill out the form. Oh yeah, you got the job. We'll worry about filling out the form later. That's how I used to hire people. And I'm sure some of these airlines are somewhat similar when it comes to hiring what they used to call trolley dollies. In my experience, the least attractive air hostesses are on budget airlines. Yeah, budget airlines, nah, they're not hot on there. But if you're on one of the high-end airlines like Qatar, oh yeah, they got hot women on those working on those planes. No doubt. Jazz says, how does that help the nightclub? You'd have to ask the manager, but as I said, his rationale was, well, in terms of the bar staff, it's obvious how that helps the nightclub. Nightclubs are driven by men spending money. This is why so many nightclubs let women in free. Yeah? Because they know as soon as you let a load of women in, guys are going to follow. If you got a bunch of very attractive women working at the bar, guys are going to want to come back there. Yeah, some guys literally are that easily tempted. No, letting the ugly things in, I explained it earlier on. His rationale was he wants the men in the club to know what they get. He doesn't want them to be deceived, yeah, by the girls inside the club because it's dark. If it's an average looking girl, she might look hot in a dark club. But then you're waking up next morning thinking you slept with a hottie, you pull back the covers and you're like, oh, she's only average. So it's going to leave you with a disappointment about that club. That's the idea. Yeah, it's crazy, but that was his idea. Whereas if the girls are butt ugly, even with beer goggles on in a dark club, you can't mistake her for a hot girl. So that was the idea. Now, Charles B says, what countries do you think have the most attractive women? I think Russia. It's all down to personal taste, isn't it? It's all down to beauty being in the eye of the beholder. Obviously, there are certain metrics that are kind of universal when it comes to beauty, but a lot of it is subjective as well. When I say certain metrics, to do with like this, the symmetry of the face and so on and so forth, general body type and what have you, but yeah, a lot of it is very subjective. Shout out to D-Man for the super chat. He says, fly Ethiopian Airlines. You'd be impressed by the air hostesses. Also, I read an article. Clubs are starting to struggle because guys are not going to clubs as much. Yeah, clubs have been struggling for a long time. Lockdown killed a lot of clubs off. That was probably the final nail in the coffin. In the UK anyway, was lockdown. But clubs have been kind of going downhill even before that. And the dating scene is so tough now. It's getting so tough for guys in the Western world that you can see why, again, a lot fewer guys would go to nightclubs, because nightclubs, and I worked in nightclubs for years as a bouncer, and I went to many nightclubs as well. Nightclubs really take the absolute pee out of guys. Yeah? Women are getting in free. Guys are not getting in free. Women are getting their drinks paid for by guys. Oftentimes, these girls are just rinsing guys for drinks, and they have no intention of dancing with a guy or even giving a guy the number. And in the modern world, especially with the dating apps and the social media, Instagram, women are more ruthless and more contemptuous of men than maybe ever before in human history, possibly. And so when you combine that dynamic with what was already a raw deal for guys in nightclubs, you can just see why so many guys don't even go to them anymore. But yeah, shout out to D-Man for the super chat. Now, S says passport bros, but the women are the same everywhere. No, they're not the same everywhere. And I can tell you that as somebody who has traveled to different countries, women are not the same everywhere. Now, the core nature of women might be the same everywhere, but because of patriarchy, certain aspects of female nature are suppressed and they, quote unquote, act right in patriarchal societies. Yeah? If you took those women and put them in Western society, would they still act right? In many cases, they would not. Right? But certainly you can go to many countries around the world and you will encounter women who are far more agreeable and far easier to pair bond with, without a shadow of a doubt. So, for example, if you were to go to, I don't know, Cambodia, you'd find it much easier to talk to women there and much easier to get dates, and you'd find the women far more agreeable in their behavior than, let's say, the average woman in London. So the passport bros thing is absolutely the solution. With that being said, some of these passport bros are extremely dumb. So they'll go overseas, right? And they will go to places where you're going to find the most scandalous women in that country. They'll go to the nightclubs and the bars, and they will target women who actually dress and look like Western women, even though they're from that country. Let's say Colombia or Brazil or whatever the case may be. They'll target women who have a westernized mindset, which is just stupid, right? If you're going to go to one of these countries and you're actually looking for a wife, a long-term, girlfriend, partner, whatever, you need to be looking for girls who dress conservatively. And there's plenty of them in many of these countries. Who are family-oriented, who are traditional. And you're not going to find them in nightclubs. I can tell you that in Costa Rica, very few Costa Rican girls even go to nightclubs. It's mostly foreigners that go to nightclubs. So yeah, some of the passport bros are really dumb. Charles B says, have you got any travel YouTube channels you watch similar to Kurt Kaz? I've kind of watched, there's no YouTube channel that, traveling passport bro type YouTube channel that I watch consistently, but I've seen a number of them over the years. There was a guy called Check in Effect. He's like a Black American guy. He had a pretty interesting YouTube channel. Again, I'm not subscribed, but now and again I would check in on his channel and see where he is. So Check in Effect was one of the channels I occasionally watch. Even Bold and Bankrupt, he was out in Eastern Europe and all that type of stuff, which I found interesting when he was in all those Eastern European countries. He was in Belarus and these places. Austin Holloman, I watched some of his stuff, and there's been various others whose names I've forgotten. But yeah, that's just to name a few. Yeah, somebody's mentioned Austin Holloman there. Yeah, he lives in Kenya now. He was traveling all over the place. I think he went to Thailand, and he went to South Africa, and he went to Tanzania and Uganda and various places in Africa, also Brazil, and I think a few other places in Latin America. S says social media has ruined women. Yeah, it's made them far less agreeable, for sure. It's made them far less agreeable. King says, what airline is that in the background? British Airways. It's British Airways. It's made it far more difficult to... See, this is the thing, right? Feminists will always tell you that patriarchy is evil. But we all know that a tree is known by its fruits. What fruits does patriarchy bear? Yeah? For all of these modern, westernized, feminized women running around, complaining about the lack of good guys, saying how they want to get married, this, that, and the other. All you need to do to find out what is required to have a high number of successful relationships, low divorce rates, is just look at the countries that have them and copy the things that they do. And you'll find that patriarchy is what creates a society where you have high marriage rates and low divorce rates, very low single parent families and so on. That's what patriarchy does. That is the fruits of patriarchy. Patriarchy creates structure in society, structure in families, structure in communities. Yes, that's what patriarchy does. When you move towards matriarchy, you basically get more selfishness and chaos and less structure. The proof is in the pudding. I'm not lying. Look at the countries for yourself. Look at the countries where there's more of a matriarchal leaning, more feminism, and you'll find that the dating scene, marriage and so on, it's all chaotic, selfish and fractured and so on. Whereas you go to a patriarchal society and divorce rates are really low, marriage rates are really high, kids grow up in two-parent homes and so on. Literally, patriarchy is the solution for all of the relationship and marriage issues. Simple. Just patriarchy. Patriarchy works for holding families and communities and therefore societies together. And because patriarchy is more logic-based, whereas matriarchy is like illogical, feelings-based and impulsive and that type of thing. So, up with the patriarchy. Jimbo says, were you a fan of Kevin Samuels? Yeah, Kevin Samuels was a pioneer, really, in that space. And hilarious with it. Absolutely hilarious. Pacer says, which countries do you think are patriarchal? I guess you meant to say matriarchal and patriarchal. Well, the West is becoming increasingly matriarchal. The bizarre thing, though, is that most women, if you would ask them whether Western society is more patriarchal or matriarchal, they'll tell you it's like a hardcore patriarchy, which is just... I can't even say that they're gaslighting. I just think they're totally delusional and illogical when they say stuff like that. Western society is overwhelmingly at the lower levels, right? And this encompasses the majority of the population. It's matriarchal at this stage. At least when you're talking about, let's say, under 35s, it's matriarchal. At the top of Western society, it's still patriarchal, yes. But very few people are at the top of Western society. You know, let's say the top 2 or 3%. Up there, it's very patriarchal. But for the majority of people outside of that 2 or 3%, certainly under the age of, let's say, 35, it's a matriarchy for all intents and purposes. It certainly leans more towards matriarchy than patriarchy. And as far as which countries are patriarchal, most countries outside the West are patriarchal. Yeah. The vast majority of countries in Africa are patriarchal. The Middle East is all patriarchal. Asia, certainly the poorer countries in Asia are all patriarchal. From the Philippines to Indonesia, Cambodia, Vietnam. These are all patriarchal societies. Japan, I mean, I'm not even sure how I would describe Japan. It's conservative, but is it really patriarchal anymore. I mean, they're probably more patriarchal in Japan than they are in the West. But Japan's a kind of a weird case because there's a lot of incels in Japan and whatnot. And yeah, their society's got issues, as all societies do. But with regards to male-female relations, there's a lot of issues in Japan. D-Man says Austin Holloman was shocked at South Africa, the attitudes of the women. He thought it was no different to the USA, which I found interesting. Yeah, South Africa is extremely westernized, extremely. I mean, in South Africa, you'll see women with gold teeth and long nails and tattoos all over the place. Yeah, that is not the place you want to go if you're looking for a traditional woman in Africa. You don't want to go to South Africa. You don't want to go to Kenya either. They're, out of the black African countries, they are the two most westernized, South Africa and Kenya. KS says, do you think these red pill guys are doing more harm than good? I would say no. You know, one thing that you learn as you grow older as a man and you have different experiences, and especially a man like me who's lived through the changes. You see, guys who are older than me, let's say 10, 15, 20 years older than me, a lot of them are totally oblivious to how much women have changed because they've never dated women like that. Do you know what I mean? But I'm of a generation where I dated before and after social media, women in their 20s. So I've seen firsthand and experienced firsthand the change and how dramatic the change is in their attitude and so on and so forth, right? So I'm in a unique position that way, that I've experienced the dating world before and after social media as an adult. And in my experiences, what I can tell you is that you could say this about human beings in general, but I'm going to say it specifically with regards to dealing with women in relationships, is that the majority of them, not all of them, the majority of them, in my experience, if you give them an inch, they'll take 10,000 miles. Therefore, what I'm getting at is a softly approach with them is not going to work. They'll run all over you. They'll walk all over you if you're coming with a softly approach. Yeah. If you're more stern and harsh and cold with them, you'll get better results. And for a good-hearted guy, that's like a really difficult thing to come to terms with. If your nature is, sympathetic and empathetic and whatnot, you don't want to be harsh with someone who you'd be in a relationship with and somebody who you'd love and get married to and all that type of stuff. You know? You don't want to be emotionally unavailable for the most. You don't want to be like that. But unfortunately, that is what it now takes. Since the patriarchy has fallen in the West, it takes you to be really harsh and stern and uncompromising with them. Because it all comes down to respect. If a woman don't respect you, she's already got one foot out the door. So that's the way it is. If you don't want to have to be like that, then you need to go live in a patriarchy where the society as a whole keeps the more disagreeable and negative aspects of female nature in check. So you won't have to do it as an individual as much. But in Western society, that's how it is now. You know what I mean? You're going to have to be like really mean in many cases to get these modern women to respect you. Charles B says, did you hear about the new Netflix show Attacking the Manosphere? I didn't, but I'm not surprised, So I mean to say that the manosphere is, I've called it a necessary evil before, because you see some of the guys in the manosphere who are going in on women to such an extent that it actually makes you wince. Do you know what I mean? Like, damn, man, these guys are really going in, and it's a bit deep. You know, it's at the point where you're like, wow, these guys actually hate women. But I think it's a necessary evil. I think that there's so much anti-male sentiment that is now pushed in the West, anti-masculine, anti-male sentiment, that in order for the pendulum to swing back in the other direction, it's going to take the Kevin Samuelses, you know, I know he's passed away, but people like that, Fresh and Fit, and all these other red pill manosphere guys, it's going to take these kind of harsh characters to allow the pendulum to swing back in the other direction. You're not going to do it with a softly approach. It's not going to work. In my opinion, anyway. Yeah, Tate is another one. That's what it's going to take. Harsh characters like that to actually get things under control. Jazz says, how long is this going to last? When will it return to normality? There's no telling, but if I had to estimate and guess, I would say it's going to take decades. Yeah, decades. I don't think this is something that can be fixed quickly, because, you know, you've got the whole establishment backing this attack on masculinity. So I think it's going to take decades to swing the pendulum back in the other direction. I think it's going to be a hell of a battle that has to be fought. A shout out to D-Man for the super chat. He says, Hatman, I highly recommend the book, The Fourth Turning. It goes into the cyclical nature of history. If you ever have time for a read. Yeah, I read quite a lot. Let me put it in my bookmarks over here. Let's type it in, The Fourth Turning. All right, I've got it up here. The Fourth Turning, what the cycles of history tell us about America's next rendezvous with destiny. All right, I'll put that in my bookmarks. Because I've got like a bookmarks folder, 4 books. I've got so many folders here. Where's the books one? There it is. All right. So yeah, thank you for the recommendation. Shout out to D-Man. KS says, what should young men do in the West do? Those who can't relocate? I would advise you to move out of the cities. Because the problem with disagreeable females who cannot pair bond is more acute in the cities. So get out of the cities, get into more rural areas, small towns, villages even, and you'll probably have a better chance of finding an agreeable woman. In the cities, particularly places like London, it's so horrendous. it's absolutely horrendous in the cities now. Jazz says, good question actually. What would you recommend youths to read? On which subjects? You know, because I read a lot of different books about different things. Historical books, books about psychology, which is a favorite of mine. All sorts of different books. S says, do you think it could be part of a depopulation strategy? Absolutely. I think that's why this has been pushed. I think they want to destroy male-female relations in order to control population growth. Absolutely, I think that's what it is. Or at least one of the reasons that they're doing it is to control population growth, for sure. And the reason that they want to control population growth isn't because there's not enough land. There's more than enough land for, to accommodate the number of people on Earth right now. So it's not a land thing, it's a resources thing. Resources are finite. And with so much of the world industrializing and developing and whatnot, the demand for resources is growing exponentially. And so if you cannot produce more resources, then the only other solution is to control the population size so you don't have to use as many resources. So yeah, I think that that's definitely one of the main reasons for this demonization of masculinity and the destruction of male-female relations, is to prevent people from breeding as much as they used to. Yeah, there are always people, pushing religion and the Bible and all that type of stuff. And if that's your path and that helps you, it's all good. And in fact, I will big up religious communities because that's one way that you have a better chance of finding an agreeable woman, is through the church or the mosque or the synagogue. If you go to Stamford Hill in North London, which is a big Jewish community there, you'll see a very large number of married Jewish couples walking around. Same way when you go to Muslim communities, marriage rates are generally higher. The Christian communities are not as strong in that way in the West, but certainly the Jewish and Muslim communities are more patriarchal, let's just put it that way. And therefore you got a better chance of finding an agreeable woman in those communities, if you are of that religion as well. But I'm not a religious person myself. I couldn't live a lie. I couldn't pretend to believe in something which in my heart I do not believe. So that's why I haven't gone down that route myself. Do you know what I mean? Of just joining some religious community. I can't live a lie. I can't do it. I don't believe that stuff, and yeah, I can't pretend. Iron's analysis says, Hatman, do you rate non-fiction self-help books at all? I'm not particularly interested in them. And I want to say that a lot of the self-help gurus, I find them very grifty. Do you know what I mean? But that's just me personally. I'm sure there are plenty of other people who find these self-help gurus and self-help books very helpful. So it's different strokes for different folks, It all depends on the type of personality you have. So for example, a lot of people these days are going to therapy to deal with, stress, anxiety, mental health issues, crises in their lives and so on, they're going to therapy. And some people find it very helpful. Other people don't find it helpful at all. Different strokes for different folks. The same way with religion. Some people are going to find it helpful. Other people won't. So you just have to find whatever works for you. Just find out whatever works for you. You know, as an open-minded person, again, being agnostic, I do not believe nor disbelieve in the existence of not just a God, but gods plural. Because generally when people talk about God, they're talking about the Abrahamic God. When I entertain the possibility of the existence of such a thing, I'm not just talking about the Abrahamic God. I'll talk about any type of gods. And so while I'm not a religious person and I'm agnostic on these things, you know, with regards to the existence of gods, that means I have attempted at various points in my life to pray when I've been in difficult situations, going through tough times. And in my experience praying, my prayers were never answered, which is one of the reasons that I've never pursued religion, you know, because with the times in my life when I'd really been in really tough spots, really difficult situations, praying and praying and praying got me nowhere. Maybe for other people, their prayers do get answered, but for me, never. So when you're looking up to the sky or wherever, or praying to God, this, that, and the other, and it doesn't help, instead you start looking within, you know, rather than looking without. Now, Striker says you don't need a Bible to know how to behave. It's an innate moral instinct. Religious people and atheists, agnostics can be moral or immoral. Well, I would partially disagree with that, Striker. I think that some people absolutely do need the Bible or another religious book to know how to behave. And this is why I'm an advocate for religion, because not everybody is, I'm going to assume, you know, I'm going to put you in the same category as me. Not everybody's like us. Yeah, not everybody's like us. Some people really do need a set of instructions, do you know what I mean? Or else they're going to behave like a savage. Yeah. So, no, I think some people absolutely do need the Bible and other religious books to know how to behave. Without them, they are lost. And I'm not being condescending when I say that. I'm literally saying it from personal experience. I've seen people who cannot function in a constructive way in society without believing in a religion. I've seen it. And for that reason, like I say, I advocate for religions, you know, like Christianity, Islam, and what have you. Not that I agree with everything and all the practices in those religions, no, but for the most part, right, I think they do good. At least in the modern world. Obviously, in centuries gone by, they were used as a tool for imperialism. And in that context, they were very bad. But in a secular society, I think religions do a lot of good. Jackie Boy Johnson says, does being religious help in boxing and sports like it gives you an edge? I would say yes. I would say yes. And see, this is something that a lot of atheists don't really reckon for, is never mind about whether God exists or, you know, all these spiritual entities exist or not. The belief in them gives people psychological and emotional strength. It does. Yeah, absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt. The belief in God, not whether, you know, whether God exists or not. People who have a very strong belief in God, very strong faith in God, do have a certain psychological strength a lot of the time that allows them to get over many issues and obstacles. There's no doubt about that. And as Let Me A says there, if you notice, most top tier athletes are religious. Indeed, they do get strength from it. There's no question. Again, this is why I'm not somebody that ridicules religious people. That's what most atheists do. They're always, it's like one of the main things in their lives is just to constantly ridicule religion and religious people. But no, religion gives a lot of people a lot of strength and allows them to achieve things in their lives. You know, it's like a psychological, it's something that galvanizes their psychological strength, if that's even a way to describe it. Jazz says, I just don't like it when they promote religion to you. Me neither. Proselytizing really annoys me. I feel patronized. When people try to proselytize and, you know, convert me and all that, I don't like that. And so the religious friends that I still have are the ones who don't do that. They're the ones who respect the fact that I'm not interested in being religious. They don't try and, you know, push their religion upon me. Because once people start trying to push their religion upon me, I check out, mate. Yeah. I find it disrespectful. Jazz says we got a preacher in the chat. Matthew Duke says, like when vegans push veganism. Yeah, believe what you want to believe. Just don't try to push it on me. I have a mind of my own. I can think for myself. And I can draw my own conclusions. You know, it's like when religious people proselytize, it's as if they're assuming you're ignorant. And I'm not ignorant. In many cases, it's they who are ignorant of other religions. So, for example, when I've had people proselytize to me about, let's say, Christianity, I asked them about Judaism and I asked them about Islam and Zoroastrianism and Hinduism and other religions, and they know nothing about them. So I'm like, well, how can you be so sure that your religion is the true religion and your God is the true God when you haven't even studied the other religions out there? So it's not me who's ignorant of your religion. It's actually you that's ignorant of other religions, but yet you're so sure. Do you know what I mean? Again, not to bag on religions and whatnot, but it's the proselytizing that I really don't like. When people are like patronizing me, but anyway, you know what I'm talking about. I don't like being preached to and whatnot. I can think for myself. And that's the thing. As an agnostic, I have entertained the Abrahamic God and so on and so forth. It's not like I've been closed to it. I've entertained it. I've tried it. I've said, okay, let me pray to this God and so on and so forth. And it didn't work for me. The prayers were never answered over the years. Stockholm says, Hatman, when it comes to your spirituality, have you found what works to you, or are you still looking? Well, I don't see the need to necessarily have a fixed position with regards to spirituality. I'm okay floating around. I'm comfortable that way because that's my nature. I'm a nomadic person. I'm a free spirit in the truest sense. So I don't necessarily feel the need to find something that I need to permanently attach myself to. I'm happy floating around in infinite space, having different thoughts and contemplating different ideas and so on. That's the essence of who I am. Hence, that's why I'm agnostic, because, I like the whole Socrates philosophy. The only true wisdom is in knowing I know nothing. Some people find that weird, frightening, uncomfortable, but it's who I am. It's my nature. So I don't find it uncomfortable at all. What I would find uncomfortable is attaching myself to a belief system. I'd find that uncomfortable, Because once you attach yourself to a belief system, a dogma, then you're shutting down your ability to think critically. You're shutting down your ability to contemplate new ideas and new possibilities. And that is antithetical to my nature. So I would have to no longer be myself if I were to do that. Stockholm says, got you, but do you believe there can be some sort of system, religion that can give you answers and help you to go to levels you currently can't imagine? Very possibly. Very possibly. I haven't come across such a religion or system yet, but very possibly. Yeah, very, very possibly. Jazz says, what are your thoughts on Buddhism? They got some interesting ideas over there. Yeah, Buddhism, Hinduism, the Eastern religions, they do have very interesting ideas with karma, dharma, the different yuga cycles and whatnot. It is interesting. And to my personality, for somebody of my personality type, it's more that is more appealing than the Abrahamic religions. But at the same time, I have a lot of questions, and there are many things with regards to the Vedic spiritual systems that I'm skeptical about. Shout out to Gaz for the super chat. He says, Hatman, I rewatched Mercer versus Cooper earlier. Damn, yeah, that was a hell of a slugfest. A hell of a slugfest. For those of you unfamiliar with the fight, it's on YouTube. Ray Mercer versus Burt Cooper. Burt Cooper was a dangerous journeyman. Let's just put it that way. Back in the 1990s mainly, but I think he turned pro in the 80s. And he was actually mandatory for Evander Holyfield's cruiserweight title, but Holyfield ended up moving up because he couldn't make the weight anymore. They eventually fought for Holyfield's heavyweight titles. Burt Cooper stepped in as a late replacement. Holyfield was originally supposed to fight Mike Tyson, but Tyson went to prison, or he caught a case and ended up going to prison. So Tyson couldn't participate in that fight. They then brought in a guy called Francesco Damiani to replace Mike Tyson, but he pulled out at short notice, and then Burt Cooper stepped in literally at the last minute to fight Evander Holyfield, and he gave Holyfield a hell of a fight. Holyfield got the first count of his career in that fight. So yeah, shout out to Gaz for the super chat and the recommendation. For anyone who hasn't seen Ray Mercer versus Burt Cooper, definitely check it out if you like heavyweight slugfest. Boom says, what do you think of Scientology? I got a leaflet in the post the other day. I didn't know they were in London. Oh, okay. I didn't know they recruit from the general population like that anymore. It's mainly celebrities who are into Scientology, you know? L. Ron Hubbard's religion. What do I think of it? I am not massively well versed on their beliefs. I know some of their beliefs, and it's to do with, you know, alien beings and stuff like that. What do I make of it? It's a story which is as plausible as any other religious origins of humanity, origins of the world story. You know, as plausible or non-plausible as the rest of them. Since none of us were there when the universe was created, when human beings as we are today, anatomically modern human beings, none of us have got the time machine to go back and check how these things were done. So people come up with stories, and it's up to the individual to decide whether they believe it or not. With, looking at evidence, but you're never going to get enough evidence to prove it one way or the other. So it's more of a intuitive thing. What feels true to you? The Celtic Magician says, I was getting YouTube ads for Freemasonry popping up everywhere. Well, Freemasonry is a lot more widespread than Scientology. So that's actually less surprising. Scientology is really, like, my perception of it anyway, is quite small. There's not that many practitioners or followers that I'm aware of anyway. But it's popular among celebrities, particularly in America. You've got the likes of Tom Cruise, who's a Scientologist. I think Will Smith and Jada Pinkett dabbled in it as well. And that was started by Mr. L. Ron Hubbard, who's an interesting character himself, or was an interesting character. John Travolta, that's right, another one. Jackie Boy Johnson says, Hatman, how do you think the human race will end? Will it end? Is the counter question. Or will it go on forever? I don't know. And by going on forever, let's say the Earth gets destroyed at some point by a meteor or a comet or whatever. Who's to say by that stage human beings won't have moved off world, you know? Alexander says, I used to live near the Scientology building. I'd advise not to go in to just have a look around. You may well be followed, and before you know it, they have all your info. Many stories heard like that. Shout out to Danny for the super chat. Okay, Alexander says the Scientology building in LA, that is. Lived in California many years. Shout out to Alex for the super chat. He says, just watch The Greatest. Ali is not an actor. Yeah, that film is hilarious. It's the most self-indulgent thing you'll ever see. Ali playing himself. Oh, that's hilarious, that film. Rainer says, Hatman, surely you are worried about recent political developments. I've lived long enough to know that political developments are generally going in a negative direction. Not in a completely straight line. There are peaks and troughs, but it's generally getting worse and worse and worse. So I don't really pay too much attention to politics in that way. I concentrate on sorting my own problems in my own life out. I don't rely on politicians or anything like that. So people who get too caught up in politics tend to be really upset all the time, you know, and it's like politicians and which political party gets in and which policy is enacted then controls your happiness, you know? So I don't really like to give politicians and other people that much power over my mental and emotional state. Obviously, some of the policy changes that happen, that, you know, governments enact will affect all of us. But there are ways around these things. And if necessary, like myself, just get out of the country, you know? There is recourse. Jackie Boy Johnson says, humanity has to end. As with everything, it's the law of entropy. Well, I'm not particularly convinced by laws, you know? It's a human concept. The idea that everything has an end. Says who? Says humans? So we know everything, do we? It's like the whole Big Bang. Oh, the universe started with a Big Bang. Okay, let's be metaphysical about it. What happened before the Big Bang? You know, human beings, as I said earlier on, if the earth gets destroyed, who's to say that human beings won't have left the earth by then? So I'm just exploring the different possibilities. I don't necessarily think it's a given that humans will cease to exist. Maybe humans are a more important and integral part of the universe and of reality than we realize. You know, especially if this simulation theory has any validity to it. Folatagate says, do you ever watch Formula One? Nah. I've never been into Formula One. I find it very boring. Iron's Analysis says, Hatman, do you believe most people's personality types are fixed, or can they change it quite drastically? I.e., introvert becomes extrovert? Well, when you're younger, and this is well known, when you're younger, you have greater neuroplasticity. Yeah. Young people's minds and even brains are literally more malleable. Yeah. And so when you're younger, I think it's more of a possibility of dramatically changing your personality type from an introvert to an extrovert. But once you reach past a certain age, it becomes decreasingly likely that you're able to dramatically change your personality, unless you suffer some type of big trauma that can jolt you into a different personality type. So that's what I'll say. Debiaka says, yeah, good can't exist without bad. But again, good and bad are human concepts. And good and bad are both subjective. Rainer says, Hatman, do you think Jayal Pattaya is an on-top bully fighter? He struggled against Grandpa Breedis. How would you rate him against Prime Usyk? Usyk struggled against Breedis too. Breedis is a very good fighter. Yes, he was older when he fought Opataya than he was when he fought Usyk, but the first time, Breedis was still very useful when he fought Opataya the first time. So I rate Opataya highly. He's not as skilled as Usyk is, but he's vicious, he's fast, he's explosive. And no, I don't think he's a non-top fighter, because when he fought Breedis the first time, he suffered a broken jaw early, and he fought the majority of the fight with a broken jaw. So Opataya's got that dog in him, and I don't think he's an on-top fighter. I think he's a proper... Is he Maori or is he Samoan? I think he's Samoan, right? From New Zealand, but his ethnic background, I think he's Samoan. He's a proper Samoan warrior. You go back a couple hundred years, when the Europeans arrived in New Zealand, he would have been one of the people on the front line, ready to charge into battle. He's that personality type. Jackie Boy Johnson says, I've become more confident as I've gotten older, more introverted as a teenager. Well, not all people, but a lot of people become more individuated as they get older. This is a Jungian term. Individuation is basically where you become more of an individual and less attached to the collective. You're less concerned about the opinions of other people. You're less concerned about following trends and fashions and stuff like that. And you become more unique. So, yeah, this is what Jung called the process of individuation. And when you're young, because you have so many hang-ups related to what other people think of you, that might cause you to become introverted, right? Because you don't want to express yourself for fear of what other people might say or how other people might treat you. But when you get older and you individuate more, you drop all those fears, and you're no longer in those peer groups where you get all this juvenile pressure on you, and you just feel more free and open to be your true self. So yeah, there's a lot of people like that who maybe were shy as kids, but when they grow into adulthood, they become less shy because they start caring less about what other people think. Matthew Duke says, yeah, Opataya's Australian, excuse me. Yeah, not from New Zealand. Yes, that's right. He's Australian with Samoan heritage. Hussein says, as an adult, I'm paranoid and don't trust anyone. Well, yeah, you can not trust anyone, but do you care what they think about you? Okay, Kadite Hasbol says, the universe is massive, beyond imagination. You think you can't have a personal paradise, hundreds, thousands, millions, etc. of times larger than Earth, etc. for everyone, depending on your status and good deeds? Okay, I'm not quite sure the way you've worded that, what you're trying to get across. Striker says, are you watching Cambosis later, Hatman? I may do. I might not watch it live, but I'll definitely watch it, or probably watch it afterwards if I don't catch it live. Stockholm says, Hatman, thoughts on Bob Lazar and his Area 51 claims? Interesting claims. I don't know what to make of it, really. What do you make of it? Because when people come out with claims and no evidence, what can you really do with it? See, most people will either call BS or they'll believe it 100%. Whereas I'm agnostic about things like that. Yeah, I'm just, I don't know. Don't know what to think of it. Interesting claims. I mean, if I had to guess one way or the other, and it is just a guess, I would lean more towards Bob Lazar being full of it. But I'm not being, I don't say that with too much conviction, but I'd more lean towards him being full of it. AO says he put Area 51 on the map. Yeah, in terms of the public awareness, he did actually, yeah. Iron's analysis says, Hatman, what is the one positive habit you have taken with you your whole life that has a huge positive impact? I would say affirmations, but affirmations for me were never really a conscious thing. It's an aspect of my personality, and people who feed their egos, and I've long said that, especially for a man, you need your ego. This whole notion of killing your ego is insane. You need to control your ego, yes, because if you don't control your ego, it can get out of control and you find yourself in very serious trouble. But your ego is absolutely necessary to get you through things, to give you confidence, to give you drive and ambition and so on and so forth. You need your ego. And an aspect of having an ego is affirmations, telling yourself that you're this, that, and the other, and building your ego up. And I always had that from quite a young age, People who don't have that, who've got a much weaker ego, can develop, really weird personalities and can become really envious and stuff like that. So we're really talking about self-belief. Liam and Chain says, do you read a lot? What's your favorite genre? Yeah, I do read a lot. And I like psychology in particular, but also history. Because history is a set of lies agreed upon, so the way you have to approach it is to read many, many different sources and different takes on the same periods in history that contradict and so on. Valaga says, which age was your prime, Hatman? You mean my physical prime? Aesthetically, my physical prime was probably, I don't know, early 20s? 23, 24? That was probably my physical prime aesthetically. But in terms of athletically, it might have actually been my mid-30s. Although, I'm guessing because I never had anybody timing my sprints and, all that type of stuff. But in terms of like a balance of physical strength, athleticism, running speed, energy, and so on, I want to say maybe my mid-30s would have been my prime. I was definitely a lot physically stronger when I was, let's say, 34, 35 than I was when I was 25. Way physically stronger. All right, there's somebody in the chat saying George Foreman died. I just did a quick search and I can't see anything about George Foreman dying. Can anyone else confirm this? Because I've seen nothing about it. Striker says, I'm 46 and stronger now, Hatman. Weight training since my late teens helped, but my joints also suffered. Where have you heard this, Jimbo Jones, that George Foreman died? Because I did a search, that's why I went silent, and I can't see anything. So where did you hear this? His family did a post on what? On where? On which account? Okay, it is true. Yeah, I could see it here on Instagram. It is true. So to read it out, this is from George Foreman's Instagram page. obviously a member of the family, has written it. It says, "Our hearts are broken. With profound sorrow, we announce the passing of our beloved George Edward Foreman Sr., who peacefully departed on the 21st of March 2025, surrounded by loved ones, a devout preacher, devoted husband, loving father, and a proud grand and great-grandfather. He lived a life marked with unwavering faith, humility, and purpose. A humanitarian, an Olympian, and two-time heavyweight champion of the world, he was deeply respected, a force for good, a man of discipline, conviction, and a protector of his legacy, fighting tirelessly to preserve his good name for his family. We are grateful for the outpouring of love and prayers and kindly ask for privacy as we honor the extraordinary life, of a man we were blessed to call our own." So yes, George Foreman has passed away at the age of, it doesn't actually say his age here, but it was in his 70s. Had to check because there was somebody in the chat the other day claiming that Baby Ting had passed away, which was not true. Yeah, if you go to George Foreman's Instagram page, you'll see it on there. It's on his Instagram page with a blue tick and everything. Stockholm says, "Hatman, I want to believe Bob is telling the truth. He makes a strong case. He also realized aliens don't have to be super intelligent. With luck and right magical elements, they could still space travel." Well, I remember back in the 1990s when UFOs were very popular in popular culture because of shows like The X-Files and The Outer Limits and all that stuff. Yeah, I also saw Millennium and Lone Gunman, as Joe's referring to there. And so during the 90s, there was this UFO craze. Every teenager had a poster, or many teenagers had a poster. There were two posters that were ubiquitous in teenage bedrooms back in the 90s. One of them was a poster of a marijuana leaf, and the other one was a poster of an alien gray. And sometimes they had posters which had both of those images on. An alien gray with a marijuana leaf. An alien gray smoking a spliff. But because there was so much interest in UFOs and aliens and whatnot back in the 90s in popular culture, of course, the mainstream brought on these scientists and asked them whether it's possible that there are aliens visiting Earth. And the scientists all came out with the same answer. They said that, well, it's not possible because of the distances that you would have to travel. You wouldn't have enough fuel. You wouldn't live long enough. There are no spacecraft that can, move quick enough, and so on and so forth. Now, it's amazing that somebody who's supposed to be educated and, supposed to be a critical thinker if you're a scientist, could say something so foolish. Because that whole argument is based upon the assumption that an alien race doesn't have a better understanding of physics than we do. It's based upon the assumption that they don't have propulsion technology and an understanding and mastery of manipulating space-time beyond what we do. Yeah, it's based upon all these unnecessary assumptions. It's like some uncontacted tribe out there in the Amazon saying to each other, "Oh no, nobody can ever discuss, nobody can destroy our homes because human beings can't fly." Let's say they've never seen a plane. How would human, we can't grow wings and this. Just because they can't do something, they might assume that nobody can do it. And so that's what those scientists were doing at the time. Just because they were literally judging potential alien races by what human beings are capable of. It's just totally, it's asinine, it's stupid. It's unbelievably stupid. So, that is not an adequate way to dismiss the possibility of aliens visiting Earth. Now, I'm not saying aliens have ever visited Earth, but I'm open to the possibility. Let's just put it that way. Andy P says, I still have an alien poster. It says, take me to your dealer. I'm pretty sure I've seen that one. Yeah, because those posters were ubiquitous back in the 90s on teenage boys' bedroom walls. Yeah, some type of poster with a marijuana leaf on it. There might have been a Dr. Dre marijuana leaf poster. Snoop Dogg. Or just a poster by, just the marijuana leaf by itself. Bob Marley with a marijuana leaf. Or, as I say, the alien grey. And then they put the two things together. The alien grey with a marijuana leaf. Or the alien grey smoking a spliff. Shout out to AJJA for the super chat. He says, are you a fan of Louis Theroux and Nick Broomfield's documentaries? I like their first ones on Nick's Tupac Biggie, one and Theroux in Miami prison. Yeah, Louis Theroux documentaries have been very entertaining over the years. I've watched many of them. His whole interview style is entertaining because, Cash says, doesn't Louis Theroux say that Savile acted alone? Yeah, which is absurd, obviously. Completely absurd for him to say that Savile acted alone, but I guess he still wants a job, doesn't he, in the mainstream media, so he's towing the line, but it's completely ridiculous. But yeah, Louis Theroux has this thing where he acts like a naive idiot in order to get people to let their guard down. And then once they let their guard down, that's when he pounces on them. So that's his whole style. And Theroux also likes to do this thing where he stares at people until they feel uncomfortable. When he does that, he just stares at them saying nothing. Matthew Duke says, rolling one as I listen to this podcast. There you go. So yeah, I've watched many Louis Theroux documentaries over the years. And Nick Broomfield, I'm not sure about him. I did see a Tupac and Biggie documentary actually at the cinema way back in the days. I watched it at the Brixton Ritzy. I can't remember whether that's the same documentary. I think it kind of rings a bell. Broomfield. It might have been a documentary that I watched, but I only saw it once again at the cinema, and I can't remember too much of what was in it. But Louis Theroux, yeah, I'm very familiar with his stuff. I saw the Savile one and so many others. The one he did about wrestling and the adult film industry was another one. Loads of them over the years. The Crime in South Africa one was funny. Where they had that guy, that criminal called Malevin, who Louis interviewed, and Malevin was like, I like crime. I will do that job and I will die for that job. And Louis like, what job? Serial killer, whatever, as long as a crime. Almost most of my life I like crime. Yeah. Praise says, what do you think of Kanye? He made some good music, you know? Made some good music. Andy P says, Theroux, very witty, goofy on purpose. Yes, definitely goofy on purpose. Fernie says, any interest in the declassified JFK files, Hatman? Well, they're heavily redacted, but there is some stuff in there about the links. And this is not new information, by the way. There are some people that have been exposing this for decades. But that there's, in the files, they show links between what happened to JFK and a certain country in the Middle East. I'm not going to name the country here, but you know the country I'm talking about. All right? A certain country in the Middle East, which is very small but very powerful. There appears to be ties between the assassination of JFK and that country. Because JFK was doing certain things that they didn't like, and that's the implication that people are making based upon what came out in the files. But really and truly, people have been making that connection for decades. Jackie Boy Johnson says, so it wasn't the mafia then? Well, the mafia may have been involved because it's a very big operation, right? And the mafia were linked to that country as well, right? Meyer Lansky was not an Italian. So, you know, some people theorize that the mafia were basically, at a certain point, the muscle in the United States for that country in the Middle East. They acted as muscle for them. And hence may have had a hand in the assassination of JFK on behalf of the country in the Middle East. Alexander says, Theroux actually regrets the Eubank one because he overstepped the mark. Yeah, I remember that one too. I remember one Louis Theroux documentary where he went to America and he met Master P, and like Louis Theroux was supposed to was basically a rapper, and he recorded gangster rap in the studio. I don't know if you guys saw that one. But Louis Theroux became a rapper and met Master P and a bunch of other gangster rappers. Jimmy says, have you ever met people who recognize your voice from YouTube? Only people who were already friends of mine. So not strangers, no, but there were friends of mine who didn't know I had a YouTube channel, who then came across some of my videos and they were like, damn, I know who that is. And they literally called me up and said, you never told me you did YouTube. That happened quite a few times. But in terms of strangers, no. Stockholm says, yeah, Hatman, magical element 115 powered those craft. An eternal fuel not found on Earth. It may not make sense to us, but that doesn't mean it cannot exist somewhere else, right? Indeed. Although I think they've discovered element 115 now, right? Pretty sure element 1, the periodic table goes beyond 115 now, I think. Any science buffs in the chat Can you confirm? I'm pretty sure the periodic table goes beyond 115 now. AJJA says death row meal. I wouldn't even want to think about it. I wouldn't even want to even entertain that thought. Paul Masterson says, yup, officially discovered in 03. Yeah. I thought I remembered hearing that at one point, that, element 115 had been discovered. Iron's analysis says, Hatman, what do you think is the prime age of life, generally speaking? It's really subjective, isn't it? Because some people will value their beauty and athleticism and, their physical state very highly. And so once they start to deteriorate physically, they will no longer enjoy their life as much, because so much of the enjoyment that they've gained out of their life was down to the physical. Whereas with other people who've never really garnered enjoyment or whatever from their physical being that much, who have done it who've got enjoyment and happiness from other things, they might find happiness more later in life, So it really depends on the individual. Also depends on where you live. In some societies, it might be easier to enjoy yourself when you're older rather than younger, and other societies, vice versa. Alexander says 40s might be prime. It's a mix of decent level of fitness and wisdom. Yeah, for some people. But at the same time, I can't imagine 40s being prime for a woman. I can't imagine if there are people who feel like they're in their prime in life in their 40s, I want to say the majority of them would be men. Because women tend to get more of their, female happiness is more linked to their physical appearance than it is with men. So I want to say, for women in the 40s, nah. At least not if they're single. But again, it all depends on the circumstances. If a woman is married and she's got kids and she's getting joy from her grandkids and stuff like that, maybe she'll be perfectly happy in her 40s. So yes, it's down to the individual. Now, Iron says, what would be your prime, Hatman, if you think you've reached it? I would like to think I haven't reached it, but maybe that's wishful thinking. I'd like to think that, there's the best is yet to come. The Celtic magician says most people in their 40s are falling apart. In certain parts of the world, yeah. I mean, I think that in modern Western society, it's difficult being in your 40s today for a lot of people because it's such a youth-driven culture now, and there's such little respect for older people. And also, as somebody else said, if you're alone in your 40s, it's going to be, for a lot of people, very, very difficult. Whereas in Africa, for example, for a lot of people, the 40s is absolutely, for men anyway, for a lot of men, their 40s is absolutely the best time of their lives. Because in Africa, there isn't the stigma regarding age gap dating that there is in the West. So in Africa, you will commonly see men in their 40s, 50s, and 60s dating women in their 20s. That is a common thing to see. And these men don't have to be rich. You know what I mean? So like in Africa, in many parts of Africa, men in their 40s, 50s, and 60s are having the time of their lives. Whereas in the West, that kind of thing is not as common. There are loads of guys in Africa still having kids when they're in their 60s and 70s. Do you know what I mean? With women, obviously, of childbearing age. So it depends where you are in the world and on your individual circumstances, but generally growing old in the West is not really the one, is it? Especially if you're alone. You know, if you're single, growing old in the West is not the place to be because there's no longer the support system that there used to be. You know, families are not as tight-knit. When you get into old age, for a lot of people, family won't even visit him. They'll fling him in a care home and, you know. Shout out to Kayvon Green for the super chat. He says 40s in the USA is very good for men as well. Well, if you got money, you know, if you're making a decent living, then I'm sure it is. But if you're doing some kind of menial job, then I have to imagine it sucks to be in your 40s in the United States. If you're broke in your 40s, yeah, it's no good. Because generally, especially for men, but I think to some extent women as well, you lose friends as you get older, right? So when you're young, that's generally when you've got the most amount of friends. That's when your social circle is at its biggest. And as you get older, your friends tend to fall away and you're left with very few. Kayvon Green says, being broke sucks at any age. It sucks at any age, but it's worse when you're old. And I say that because most young people are broke. So they're all in the same boat, or most of them are in the same boat, right? Whereas when you reach your 40s, you're supposed to be hitting your financial stride at that age. If you're still broke in your 40s, you're going to be finding it very, very tough. June Sport says, what's broke, it can be relative. Yeah, it's relative, but I would say it's relative to the average earnings for your age and the average earnings for your city and country. Shout out to Lawrence King for the super chat. He says, I am late 30s and fortunately do well financially, but my friends who are broke have a very hard time. Shout out to Lawrence King. You know, ultimately, happiness is derived from, for most people, not everybody, for most people, it's derived from the quality of the relationships that we have with the people in our lives, be it, spouses or significant others, family members, friends, work colleagues, neighbors. The quality of these relationships will not necessarily dictate, but have a very strong influence on how happy you are. So some people may require money to have those types of relationships because they live in a very materialistic society or a very materialistic community. Others may not require money to have those types of relationships. It also depends on your personality type. Some people, for whatever reason, are very likable. And even without money, they can get people to like them and get people to treat them well and so on. Whereas other people are not so fortunate in that way. And they will need money and so on and so forth to get people to respect them, to get people to want to be around them and listen to them and spend time with them. Kyle says, Hatman, what advice do you give to a young, lonely man? Well, since I was talking about money, many of a man's problems can be solved with money. So, try and make money. Go out, meet people abroad, in other cultures and other countries. See, one of the good things about traveling is you meet a lot of other solo travelers. If you are a solo traveler, you'll meet a lot of them, and therefore you have something in common, and you'll end up forming friendships with solo travelers. Some people travel very cheaply, especially when they go to the Far East. When they go backpacking in places like Cambodia and Vietnam and Thailand and these countries. And some people form lifelong friendships, even meet their future spouse and whatnot, going on these sojourns across the world, right? So get out there. Because you're not going to solve loneliness from your bedroom. You got to get out there somewhere, somehow, some way. Sosa says, have you ever been to or wanted to go to Qatar? I was there and felt peace I've never felt before. Yeah, I lived there. I lived in Qatar for a while. And I'm not sure if it's still like that now. It won't be far off if it isn't, but Qatar had the highest, is it GDP? One of the metrics anyway, in the entire world. So it's basically per capita the richest country in the world. Qatar. Very small population with enormous oil and gas reserves, extremely high standard of living, etc. And as I say, their airline, Qatar Airways, is my favorite airline. I flew Qatar many times. Alexander says, find what you're passionate about, level up your charisma, aim to be someone people like being around, women find that attractive and a good sense of humor. Yeah, all of that sounds hot, but I tend not to tell people stuff like that because it's not as easy as it sounds, So I would more encourage people to, rather than change themselves, because it could be very difficult to change themselves so dramatically to achieve the results you alluded to there, put themselves in environments where they're more likely to meet people who will accept them for who they are. And in other cultures, you're more likely to find that. In traditional cultures, there are far fewer lonely people from what I've experienced. Yeah. Communities are more tight-knit. For example, when you go to the Middle East, right? When I lived in Qatar, the locals are very, very inquisitive. And this is something a lot of Western people might not reckon for when they go to a Muslim country. They think that nobody will talk to you. No, it's the opposite. Arabs are very inquisitive people. So if you're walking around in like an Arab neighborhood or fishing, I used to do a lot of fishing when I was in the Middle East, they will constantly come up and talk to you. Strangers who you've never met before in your life. They will see you there fishing and they'll immediately come up and talk to you. They're far more open to talking to strangers than British people are. Way more. Arabs are very, very inquisitive people. And you tend to find that in these more traditional cultures, is that people are actually more willing to talk to strangers. In traditional cultures, at least men, right? Because the women out there are not going to talk to strange men at all. But the men are far more willing to talk to strangers than men in somewhere like Britain. American people are far less inhibited in that way. Yeah, Americans will talk to strangers because like here where I live, there's loads of Americans and they will talk to you. You know, they'll strike up conversations randomly way more than British people are really, is shy the right word to use in that way? But yeah, they're standoffish British people. They don't talk to strangers that much. Whereas Americans love talking to strangers. They do it a lot. And that's one of the things I like about Americans, actually, compared to Brits. Obviously, there are certain things I like about Brits and, you know, things I like about the British sense of humor and certain things about British culture. But Americans are more sociable, and I definitely prefer that about them. Americans are way more sociable, generally. Like if you're on a bus, yeah, with a bunch of Brits on a holiday and you're going for an excursion somewhere, nobody talks to anybody. Literally nobody talks to anybody. And if they do, it's just a few little words and, you know, very awkward conversations. But when you get on a bus to go on an excursion with Americans, everyone's talking. Do you know what I mean? They talk to you as if they've known you their whole lives, many of them. So when it comes to like interacting with strangers, interacting with Americans is way better. And when I say Americans, I'm putting a caveat next to it. I'm talking about like people in my age group. Yeah. People in their 40s, you know, 30s, 40s. The younger ones, you might not want to be around them, you know, if they're like really hedonistic and stuff like that. But the ones who are like parents and family people and whatever, they're great to talk to. Some people talking about George Foreman passing away. Yeah, we spoke about it earlier on in the chat. Somebody informed us of it. And I read out the statement that was put up on his Instagram page by his family. Jimbo says, give us a George Foreman tribute. Well, I don't really do tributes when fighters die. It's never really been my thing. I don't tend to do that. I think I've only done one or two. I think I've done two. One was for Muhammad Ali, and the other one I think was for Corey Sanders. But generally, I don't do tributes when boxers pass away. And the reason for it is I don't really value the life of public figures any higher than the life of somebody who would die on my street. you know? I can't pretend that I'm like really heartbroken that George Foreman has passed away. I didn't know him. Obviously, as a boxer, he was a great boxer, but he hasn't been in the ring since, when was it, the 90s? So it's obviously a heartbreaking thing for his family. And I was a fan of him as a fighter, but and indeed, as somebody alluded to there, George Foreman was old. You know, he was in his 70s. People die in their 70s. Can't live forever, you know? Shout out to Alex for the super chat. He says, give us your views on Foreman when you were young or when he was young. My views when he was young, when I was young, were pretty much the same. I thought he was a beast. He was very physically strong in the ring. That's one of the things that people don't really talk about as much as they should, I think. It's not just the fact he was a massive puncher. He had tremendous physical strength. Like the way he used to manhandle opponents. I never saw George Foreman get outstrengthed by anybody. Nobody was ever able to outstrength him. Neither the young version of George Foreman or the old version of George Foreman. No one ever got the better of him as far as physical strength. He was definitely one of the physically strongest heavyweight champions of all time. Tremendous, just natural physical strength. And he used to be able to maneuver you around in the ring and then clobber you with the big jab and the massive hooks and uppercuts that would follow. And he had very strange biomechanics, didn't he, George Foreman? He was kind of very upright. He had this like stiff back. And his punches often looked very, very awkward. Very awkward trajectory on his punches and what have you. Often thrown very wide. Foreman, when he was young, in particular, threw a lot of wide shots. Older George Foreman still threw some wide shots, but it shortened his punches a bit more when he came back in the 1980s, going into the 90s. His punches were a bit shorter, as evidenced in the Michael Moorer fight. It was a very, very short right hand that did away with him. Chris Ward Music says, Hatman, the thing about speaking your truth is that it pisses everyone off, but it shows the strength of character for anyone to be legitimately honest. Respect, R.I.P. George Foreman. Alexander says, Foreman was great on HBO. Would love it when he'd stick it to Lampley and Merchant. Yeah, it was quite a funny dynamic. Yeah, as Stryker said there, Foreman had freakish strength. Nobody walked him back. They really didn't. And I've been racking my brains since I said it. Was there anyone who actually managed to walk Foreman back for the majority of a fight? And I don't think there was. Frazier couldn't do it. Ron Lyle couldn't do it. Obviously, Lyle dropped him, but he never forced. Foreman was the one who was the physically stronger in that fight. You could see it. Ken Norton obviously didn't do it. Holyfield didn't manage to do it. Tommy Morrison didn't do it. Morrison was a real good puncher. Michael Moorer couldn't do it. Yeah, I don't recall him ever being forced to fight on the back foot. He was very, very physically strong. He had tremendous presence in the ring, Foreman, He was like a force of nature. Alexander said, what about Jimmy Young? Well, Jimmy Young outboxed him. He outboxed him. BG London says Foreman had that down south power. Yeah, not just the power, but the strength, because Deontay Wilder was a great puncher, but he didn't have George Foreman physical strength. He wasn't able to manhandle people to the extent that Foreman was. Of course, he got manhandled by Tyson Fury in the second and third fights. BG London says Foreman said he was terrified of Frazier. Look at what he done. Yeah, he said he was terrified of Ken Norton as well. Maybe he needed to be afraid to get the best out of himself. He said he was scared of Frazier and scared of Ken Norton, but was not afraid of Muhammad Ali. He said he basically thought the Ali fight would be easy. Everybody was gassing his head up and telling him, don't hurt Ali. He's past it, he's old. So he thought he was going to go in there and do a demolition job. Some fighters need that fear in order to be at their best. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because some people really hide their fear well. They don't necessarily do it consciously, but subconsciously or automatically. Because if you looked at George Foreman in the Frazier fight or in the Norton fight, you'd never think he was scared, would you? He looked so menacing and intimidating and assertive in those fights. So he was able to mask and then channel his fear very effectively. Boxmind says, did you watch the Foreman film? No, I haven't seen it. Jimbo Jones says Mike Tyson was crying before some of his fights. Yeah, particularly in the amateurs, but a couple of his early pro fights as well. He didn't do it once he reached world title level, but Oliver McCall did. Oliver McCall used to cry before some of his big fights, like before the first Lewis fight, he came to the ring crying. That's the fight where he knocked Lewis out in 2 rounds. He walked to the ring crying. Shout out to Kayvon Green. He says, fear is a friend of exceptional people. Quote from Cuss. Yeah, Cuss compared fear to fire. And he said, fire is your friend. If you can control it, you can use it to cook things and so on and so forth. But if you can't control it, then it's going to destroy you and everything around you. And it was a very good way of explaining the principle to his pupils, right, the fighters, of how to control your fear and what fear is. That it's actually your friend if you control it. It gets you to be more sharp. It gets you to be more alert. It gives you energy. BG London says Foreman said he was a big Sonny Liston fan. Well, he was Sonny Liston's sparring partner. Sonny Liston took Foreman under his wing and not only showed him many boxing moves, but also showed him things about intimidation and what have you. Stryker says Stallone plagiarized a lot of Cuss's quotes word for word in Rocky V. Well, what's the name of the guy who Stallone based the Rocky character on? God, I forget his name now. Was it Chuck Wepner? I think it was Chuck Wepner, right? Stallone was actually there ringside, and that's where he came up with the Rocky idea. And Chuck Wepner tried to go after Stallone legally for years, because he basically says Stallone stole his story, stole his life story or elements of his life story to make Rocky, and never financially compensated him for it. Alexander says Chuck Wepner and Rocky Graziano. Rocky Graziano was a Customato fighter. Pretty sure it was Graziano. There was definitely some Rocky who was a Customato guy. I think it was Graziano. All right, peeps. Gonna draw the curtain on this stream, as ever. Really appreciate you guys joining me on this one. I've enjoyed the conversation. Oh, there's a final super chat here from D-Man. He says, in top 10 from Wilder, AJ Fury era, who do you think never achieved their full potential? Personally, I think AJ, he got moved up too early. That's a difficult one, because I think Tyson Fury is underachieved. Not because he was moved too fast, but because he didn't have the discipline to stay in shape. And obviously he lost several years of his career when he failed the test following the Klitschko fight. He actually failed the test before the Klitschko fight. It was after the Christian Hammer fight. But you know what I mean. So I think that Fury actually didn't really take his potential as far as it could have gone due to lack of discipline and also not really wanting to push himself for greatness. Anthony Joshua was moved too fast, but there's a lot more what ifs with AJ's ability than there is with Fury's ability. I think he would have been better off with a different trainer early on in his career than Robert McCracken. And I think if he'd been moved more slowly, he might have turned out to be better and more successful at the top level. But then again, maybe not, because there are certain things that AJ showed himself not to have. His survival instincts were poor. His recuperative powers were poor. And these are things that Tyson Fury always had. Tyson Fury's got great survival instincts, great recuperative powers. And these are things that, as a top flight fighter, you need. So I would probably say Fury maybe never reached his full potential. I don't think AJ reached his full potential either. But I reckon Fury had a bit more in him that, again, we didn't see than Anthony Joshua. And as for Wilder, I think Wilder absolutely hit his ceiling. And we saw the best of him that could have ever existed. But yeah, shout out to D-Man for the super chat. And also Striker for the super chat. He says, one for the road, Hatman. Enjoyed it as always. Much appreciated, my bro. And yes, special shout out to everybody who donated via super chat. And shout out to everyone else who contributed to the conversation. Hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. So from me, your host, Hatman on the night flight, it's over and out. Have a good one.